I picked a seat in the lobby where I could see the elevators clearly, my suitcase tucked by my legs, my fingers tracing the zipper just to keep them from shaking. Every time the metal doors slid open, my breath caught, only to fall flat when it wasn't him. Still, I kept telling myself it would be worth it. He'd step out, rub his eyes in disbelief, maybe even whisper my name the way he used to when he was moved by something. I held on to that fantasy like a lifeline. I didn't realize how fragile it actually was. After maybe 15 minutes, though it felt like a whole lifetime, my phone buzzed with a message from him. He said he was headed back to the hotel soon, exhausted from meetings. I almost laughed out loud. The timing was perfect. I texted back a simple heart, biting my lip to keep from smiling too hard, thinking how sweet it would be when he walked right into me. I even stood up a little, smoothing my blouse, feeling that familiar nervous flutter. I had no idea that the universe was about to rip the ground from under my feet. And then, those elevator doors opened. At first, all I saw was his silhouette, broad shoulders, that same posture I could recognize anywhere. But then the details sharpened, cruelly, like a camera lens focusing too clearly. He wasn't alone. He walked out holding a woman's hand, fingers intertwined in a way that wasn't casual or innocent. And worse, God, so much worse, he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. My stomach dropped so violently I felt the room tilt. He was laughing at something she said, until his eyes finally lifted and collided with mine. The moment his gaze locked on mine, the color drained from his face so fast it was almost frightening. He froze mid-step, like someone had just grabbed him by the spine. The woman beside him turned her head slowly, confused at first, then startled when she realized he was staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt welded to the marble floor, my pulse roaring in my ears. It was as if my mind refused to accept what my eyes already knew, because acceptance would have shattered me on the spot. He let go of her hand so abruptly she flinched. He didn't say my name. He didn't smile. He didn't rush toward me like the man I thought I married would have done. Instead, he just stood there, whispering something to her under his breath, probably telling her not to panic, probably begging her to stay quiet. My throat tightened painfully as I noticed again, with almost surgical precision, the bare ring finger he tried to hide behind his pocket. All those nights I cried missing him. And he'd been living a whole other life without me. The lobby seemed to shrink around me, every sound muffled except the thud of my heartbeat. I could smell the woman's perfume, sweet, floral, nauseatingly intimate, floating toward me like a slap. For a second, I honestly thought I might faint. But instead of collapsing, some stubborn instinct rooted me in place, forcing me to face the truth standing right in front of me. He took a hesitant step toward me, lips trembling, clearly searching for some excuse or lie to hide behind. And all I could think was, this wasn't the reunion I came here for, but maybe it was the one I needed. He finally reached me, his steps uneven, like his own legs were betraying him. He kept rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit he usually had only when he was lying. He didn't even greet me. Instead, he muttered that he could explain everything, his voice trembling as though he were the victim in all this. The woman lingered behind him awkwardly, clutching her purse and looking everywhere except at me. I could feel my chest tightening, but I refused to let a single tear fall, not in that lobby, not in front of her. He leaned closer, whispering that I shouldn't make a scene, as if I were the one embarrassing him. He said I should listen first, said I was misunderstanding everything, but he still didn't bother slipping his hand away from his pocket to hide the missing wedding ring properly. Every word he threw at me felt like a slap, heavy with entitlement and panic. I could tell he wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry I'd caught him. The difference stung like acid. I asked, quietly, so quietly it scared even me, who the woman was. He swallowed hard, eyes darting between us, then stammered something about her being a co-worker, someone he was just helping. The woman's eyebrows shot up, and she actually took a step back, as if she wanted no part of whatever lie he was weaving. I could smell the panic on him, thick and sour. For a split second, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the way he'd been laughing with her just moments before, fingers laced with hers like it was natural. He kept insisting I was jumping to conclusions, saying it like he was scolding a child. He claimed he'd been under a lot of stress, that I was reading too much into things, and that I should have told him I was coming so he could have prepared. Prepared. As if a husband needed preparation to welcome his own wife. My stomach twisted at the sheer absurdity. His voice got softer, almost pleading, but it was the same tone he used whenever he wanted to wiggle out of consequences. And suddenly I saw him clearly, clearer than I had in years. The woman shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing she'd walked into something far uglier than she expected. She whispered something to him, something like she didn't sign up for this, but he waved her off without even looking at her. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how he treated people. He was trying to corral me like a problem he could manage, fix, or hide. My heart felt heavy, but beneath the weight, there was something new, something sharper, a slow, rising anger that warmed me from the inside out. I told him I didn't want to talk there. His eyes widened, terrified I'd draw attention, terrified someone might overhear something damaging. He whispered that we could go upstairs, that we just needed a private moment. But the idea of stepping into any elevator with him made my skin crawl. I shook my head and walked toward the exit instead, ignoring the way his footsteps scrambled behind me. I didn't owe him a meltdown. I didn't owe him a confrontation. All I needed now was space to breathe, and clarity about what came next. Outside, the air hit me like a slap, sharp, cold, almost cleansing. I stood under the hotel's awning, watching taxis pull in and out, trying to steady the chaos inside my chest. He followed me out, grabbing my arm gently at first, then a little more urgently when I didn't turn around. He kept saying we needed to talk, that I was overreacting, that I didn't understand the situation. Those words, God, those words, felt like someone twisting a knife while telling me it was just a misunderstanding. I pulled my arm away, and he looked wounded, like I was hurting him. He kept trying to corner me with explanations that sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced them in a mirror long before I ever showed up. He said he'd taken his ring off because it irritated his skin in this climate. And he said it with a straight face, like he genuinely believed I was naive enough to swallow it. The woman lingered in the doorway behind us, frozen in place, unsure whether to leave or stay. For a moment, I wondered if she even knew he was married. But then I remembered the way she pulled her hand back when she saw me. She knew. I walked away from him, down the side of the building, until I reached a quiet corner near the service entrance. My legs felt like jelly, but I refused to collapse. Not yet. He stood a few feet away, breathing hard, asking me what I wanted him to say, what I wanted him to do. And the truth was, I didn't know. I didn't know how to react, how to scream, how to break. All I knew was that I needed distance before his lies seeped any deeper into me. So I told him we'd talk later and walked back into the lobby alone, leaving him staring at me like he'd just watched his world slip out of his hands. Back in my own hotel room, one I booked in a hurry, hands trembling so much the receptionist had to repeat everything twice, I locked the door behind me and just stood there. The silence was deafening. My reflection in the large mirror looked like a stranger's. Eyes red, shoulders tense, a smile line that had turned into something closer to a scar. I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the shock settle into my bones. I didn't fly across continents to fall apart. But right then, I felt like I might crumble anyway. After a few minutes of staring at the carpet, I realized something. Crying wouldn't give me answers, and it definitely wouldn't give me the truth. So I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath that burned all the way down, and started piecing things together. I had his hotel name, the dates he'd been here, the room number. I knew the company he worked for had strict lodging policies. If there was another woman involved, someone somewhere had seen something. And suddenly, my heartbreak sharpened into resolve. I grabbed the hotel phone and called the front desk, pretending to be his assistant. My voice was steady enough to sound believable. Grief has a way of forcing calm when it's needed most. I asked to confirm his room details for documentation, and the clerk cheerfully explained that he was registered as a single guest with one room key issued, even though two had been printed and used consistently for weeks. My grip on the phone tightened, but my voice stayed warm and polite. Inside, though? Something inside me cracked open. Painful, yes, but powerful. I thanked the clerk and hung up, staring at the receiver like it had personally betrayed me. 2 keycards, weeks of usage. My husband wasn't just having a momentary lapse of judgment. He'd built a routine with another woman. My hands shook, but my breathing steadied in a strange, almost chilling way. I wasn't collapsing anymore. I was waking up. I stepped to the window, pulled the curtains aside, and watched the city lights shimmer against the wet pavement. It was raining softly, the kind of rain that made everything look blurred. Fitting, considering how blurry my last 3 months suddenly felt. I noticed movement down below. A couple hurrying under a shared umbrella, laughing as they dodged puddles. It reminded me of us, of him, of the nights we used to walk home from dinner, hands intertwined, talking about everything and nothing. And then, like a cruel joke, my mind replayed the scene from earlier. Him stepping out of the elevator with her, not even glancing at his bare ring finger. It was like watching my memories dissolve in acid. Every excuse, every late-night meeting, every sigh in his voice when we talked on the phone. They all snapped into place like puzzle pieces I should have noticed sooner. Determined not to sit in that room drowning in pity, I grabbed my coat and slipped out the back entrance of the hotel. I kept my distance, watching the lobby through the glass from across the street. Less than 20 minutes later, I saw him walk out alone, pacing frantically, checking his phone like his life depended on it. Then, an hour later, I saw her return alone, her expression tight and irritated. She didn't even glance around. She moved like someone who already belonged there. And that told me far more than any confession ever could. When I finally slipped back into my room, my clothes were damp from the misty rain, and my hair clung to my cheeks. I sat at the desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up his social media, something I hadn't bothered checking in weeks because I trusted him that much. At first glance, everything looked normal, until it didn't. Fewer photos with me, more vague posts about work dinners and late nights. A tag from a coworker showing a group outing, and there he was in the back, smiling, relaxed, with that same woman barely visible beside him. My stomach twisted. How long had this been happening right in front of me? Digging deeper felt like peeling skin off a wound, but I couldn't stop. I needed truth, not hope. I searched the hotel online, looking for guest reviews, photos, anything that might give context. And then, buried in a forum, I found a thread from travelers mentioning that many employees discreetly accommodated long-stay couples who weren't officially registered together. My pulse quickened. I called the front desk again, this time asking casually how long my colleague had been staying. The answer? 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He'd been here for nearly half the time he'd been away, with her. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it sink in. Every unanswered call, every rushed conversation, every excuse about being too tired, suddenly felt like sharp stones pressing into my chest. But beneath the heartbreak, something colder began forming. something steady and deliberate. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had underestimated me, and that somehow gave me strength. I looked at myself in the mirror again. Same eyes, but a different woman staring back. Not broken, not defeated, just awake. And I knew right then I wasn't leaving this country without reclaiming something he thought I would never fight for. My dignity. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity that didn't match the mess inside my chest. It felt like my heart had cried itself dry overnight, leaving only this cold, steady resolve behind. I showered slowly, letting the hot water burn against my skin, grounding me in the present instead of the memories clawing at me. When I stepped out, the mirror showed a woman who had been gutted, but rebuilt. I put on fresh clothes, tied my hair back, and reminded myself I wasn't here to beg for answers. I was here to end a chapter he'd ruined long before I arrived. I texted him to meet me in the hotel's small business lounge, the one tucked behind sliding glass doors where no one really went unless they needed privacy. He replied within seconds, desperate, almost frantic. When he walked in, he looked like he hadn't slept. Eyes puffy, hair a mess, the facade of control slipping right off him. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, whispering that he couldn't lose me, that he never meant for things to go this far. His voice cracked in places, but I couldn't tell if it was guilt or fear of consequences. I let him talk, let him unravel, let him stumble through half-truths and polished excuses. He said the woman was temporary comfort, said it didn't mean anything, said he'd been lonely and overwhelmed and not thinking straight. Hearing him twist infidelity into a moment of weakness made something inside me harden like stone. I didn't interrupt, not once. My silence seemed to rattle him more than any outburst could have. He kept begging me not to judge him on one mistake, not to throw away everything we had. And still, I just stared at him, letting him feel the emptiness his betrayal carved into me. Eventually, he asked me why I wasn't saying anything, his voice cracking like he was the wounded one. He said my silence was making him nervous, said he felt like I was planning something. And maybe I was, though not in the way he feared. I finally looked him in the eyes and told him calmly that I knew the truth. Not just what I'd seen in the lobby, but the weeks of shared keycards, the late-night outings, the lies he'd spun long before boarding that plane months ago. His face fell, as if he'd just realized he'd been playing with a fire he could no longer control. He tried to reach for my hand, whispering that we could fix this, that couples go through worse, that we didn't have to let others know. That last part, not letting others know, that was the real fear behind his frantic apologies. His reputation, his image, the version of himself he'd carefully built for his parents, for his colleagues, for the world. And it hit me then. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the approval, the admiration, the clean facade he'd been hiding behind like a mask. So I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands calmly, and told him something simple, something that drained the remaining color from his face. I said that whether he realized it or not, he'd already lost me the moment he chose to hold another woman's hand. He begged me not to ruin his life, begged me not to tell his parents, begged me not to make him look like a monster. Every plea was about him, never about me, never about the vows he broke. And in that moment, my heartbreak finally stopped hurting. It turned into purpose. I left him sitting there in the business lounge, hunched over and trembling, while I walked back to my room with a steadiness that surprised even me. The second the door clicked shut behind me, I picked up the phone and dialed his parents. His mother answered, her voice warm and excited at first. She thought I was calling to share good news. But when I gently explained where I was, what I'd seen, and how long it had been going on, that warmth melted into stunned silence. She whispered that she had no idea, that she was so sorry I had been hurt this way. His father asked to speak to me next, and his tone was different. Quiet, controlled, but filled with a disappointment so heavy it made my chest tighten. He apologized on his son's behalf, apologized for what I'd gone through alone, apologized for raising a man who could betray a woman like this. Hearing that from him, a man who had always held his son on a pedestal, told me everything I needed to know. The truth had landed exactly where it would hurt my husband the most. Not through shouting or revenge, but through the quiet collapse of the admiration he valued above everything. When I hung up, I felt something loosen in my ribcage, as if a knot had finally come undone. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't fall apart. Instead, I stood by the window, watching the city stretch out beneath me while he texted me message after message, begging me to stop, pleading with me to at least talk to him first, insisting he could fix the situation before it got worse. But I ignored every single message. My silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, measured, and sharp. And as I watched the sun dip behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the streets, I felt something shift inside me, like the beginning of an ending I was finally strong enough to face. The flight home felt entirely different from the one that had brought me there. On the way in, I'd been bubbling with excitement, hope blooming in my chest like a bright flame. On the way out, I sat by the window wrapped in a blanket, watching clouds drift by while my mind sifted through the debris of my marriage. I wasn't numb. Numbness would have been easier. Instead, I felt everything: sorrow, betrayal, anger, and a strange, steady clarity that kept me grounded. I wasn't returning home defeated. I was returning home to reclaim what belonged to me. When I walked into our house, the familiar scent wrapped around me, but it didn't feel comforting anymore. It felt tainted. Still, I moved through each room with purpose. I opened closets, drawers, cabinets, pulling out every belonging of his and stacking them neatly in boxes. Shirts he'd left behind, books he never finished, souvenirs from places we'd visited together. Each item felt like a tiny shard of glass pressing into my fingertips, but I packed them all anyway. This wasn't grief. This was closure, as clean and orderly as I could make it. By evening, I was standing in the living room surrounded by sealed cardboard boxes, each one labeled with his name. I arranged for them to be shipped directly to his parents' home. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same parents who'd always believed he walked on water would now receive the fragments of the life he destroyed. As the courier drove away with the first load, I felt my shoulders drop, tension slipping off me like a heavy coat. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot, but this was the first real breath I'd taken since stepping into that hotel lobby. The next day, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of coffee growing cold beside me. I pulled up our bank statements, something I rarely did because he always handled the finances. But now that I was looking, patterns jumped out immediately. Withdrawals in consistent amounts, spaced out every few days, all from the same ATMs near that hotel abroad. My heart clenched, but not from heartbreak this time, from confirmation. Every missing call, every excuse, every late-night meeting. He wasn't just being unfaithful emotionally. He was funding a whole second life with my trust and our shared resources. I gathered every document I could find: account statements, insurance forms, our marriage certificate, and took them to a lawyer a friend had recommended months earlier for something unrelated. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained everything, his expression tightening the more details I gave. When I finished, he told me something I hadn't expected. Because of the international work contract my husband was under, marital misconduct, especially infidelity, had legal and financial repercussions. And given the evidence I had, I was entitled to a substantial share of his assets and benefits from the project abroad. Hearing that left me breathless. Not because I wanted his money. God knows I would have traded every cent just to get the man I thought I married back. But because justice, for once, wasn't out of reach. My lawyer drafted the first set of documents while I sat there with my hands folded, listening to the soft click of his keyboard. When he slid the papers toward me, I stared at them for a long moment. My fingers trembled as I picked up the pen, but they steadied just in time to sign my name with a calm I didn't even recognize as my own. When I got home from the lawyer's office, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from him, missed calls, long paragraphs where he said I was acting impulsively, that I was throwing our marriage away over a misunderstanding, and that we should talk like adults. But the more he tried to twist the narrative, the calmer I became. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself or justify anything. I didn't even feel anger anymore. Just a quiet certainty that the bridge between us had burned down long before I ever touched a match. His mother called me again, her voice shaking with apology and heartbreak. She said she couldn't believe he had done something so cruel, said the family was devastated, said they supported whatever decision I made. And for the first time in all this, I felt something warm settle in my chest. Validation. Not revenge, not triumph. Just the simple relief of being believed, being held up instead of questioned. They asked if I needed anything, if I wanted them to intervene, but I told them no. Some endings need to be quiet, and mine did too. That night, I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the soft glow of a lamp spill across the boxes he no longer had a place in. I realized I hadn't responded to a single message of his, not by accident but by instinct. Silence had become my armor, my boundary, my answer. And deep down, I knew it was the only language he truly understood. As I closed my eyes and let the weight of the day sink in, I felt a strange peace begin to settle. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I was no longer standing in the ruins he created. I was walking away from them,